I am going to tell you a story that happened a long time ago. It wasn't just 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, not even 1,000,000 years ago, but almost 14 billion years ago. It was before people lived. It was before dinosaurs. In fact, it was even before there was an earth. Now, if there was no earth, there were also no people to tell the story of what happened. So no one really exactly knows how things went. But scientists have studied and guessed and experimented, and this is a way they think things might have happened. In the beginning, there was not only nothingness. There was no life as we think of it today. There was no matter. There was no energy. There was no time. There was no space. All was darkness and cold. Not dark like your room at night, or even like a cave, even darker. Can you imagine such a cold, silent emptiness? Then, suddenly, there was an explosion, and everything that was to become our universe was in that explosion. From one point, one extremely small point, the universe bursts into existence. All of the matter, energy, time, and space the universe will ever hold was contained in and expanded from that one point. The entire universe was contained in the size of a small, extremely dense and hot ball of energy. The temperature of the ball of energy was more than 1,000,000,000 times hotter than the temperature at the center of our sun. All of this happened in less than 1 second. All of this happened in the beginning when all that was the universe was hot particles that were rapidly expanding in every direction. At this time in the very early universe, the four forces of nature were together as one force. These four forces are very important. Even today, everything in the universe operates because of these four fundamental forces. They are gravity, strong, electromagnetic, and weak. Gravity is what pulls two masses together, just like this eraser is pulled to the earth. Strong is like glue that holds together the center of very small particles called atoms. Electromagnetic is the force of charges and light. When we turn on the flashlight, the batteries make the charges in the filament of the light bulb move, and as they move, they give off light. Weak turns one very small particle, particles smaller than atoms, into another. These four forces were together as one, but soon separated. As we've said, everything in the universe today operates because of these four forces. We may observe that when things are moving, they will keep moving unless something stops them. And if something is still, it will stay still. We call this inertia. When we fill a bucket with water and swing it around, gravity is causing the water to fall, but the force of us swinging the bucket keeps it from doing so. As the particles in the hot energy expanded, they obeyed these forces and principles. As the universe continued to expand, these particles began to cool. Then, about 300,000 to 500,000 years after the universe's creation, the temperature became low enough at about 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit so that the lightest element that we know of, hydrogen, formed. Then, when the universe was 1 million years old, matter began to clump together and eventually formed galaxies. As gravity pulled this matter more tightly together, the reaction of hydrogen and helium gases caused many of them to burst into flame and become stars. Other matter clumped together to form planets. The stars that were formed were very far from each other. Light travels very fast. It travels 186,000 miles, not per hour, but per second. If we could get in a race car and drive at 100 miles per hour around the world, it would take us 10 days and 10 nights. It takes light only a second to go around the world 7 times. That's how fast light travels. Yet even moving that fast, it takes the light from some stars almost 14 billion years to reach us. That's how far they are. And there are billions upon billions of stars. If each star were a grain of sand, we could cover the state of Texas with a pile of sand that was as tall as the length of 3 football fields, and that still wouldn't be enough sand. Out of all of these billion stars, there is one star that is special to us. We call it the sun. The sun may not seem very big when we see it in the sky, but that is because it is so far away. If we flew towards the sun in a spaceship at 100 miles per hour, day in and day out, it would take us 106 years to get there. It is actually so big that 1,000,000 Earths could fit inside the sun. In fact, if this were a picture of the sun, this would be the Earth. In the beginning, the earth was not at all like it is now. In the beginning, it was just a hot ball of spinning gas and dust. So were all the planets. The balls of gas and dust were not big enough or heavy enough to burst into flames like the sun, but they were very hot. However, they also were traveling through the coolness of space. As the earth traveled, it began to cool. As it cooled, some of the particles really liked each other. We call this attraction. Other particles didn't like each other, and we call this repulsion. They stayed away from each other. As the particles cooled, they also began to change from gas to liquid to solid. The solids were tightly put together. They kept their own shape. The liquids were much looser and rolled around on themselves. They take on the shape of the container that they are in, and we can pass our hand through them. Gases are even more spread out. In fact, we often can't even see them, but they are there, moving around the room. Silently raise your hand when you can smell it. When gas cools, it becomes a liquid. When a liquid cools, it becomes a solid. That is just what happened as the earth moved through the coolness of space. But once the gases were near the hot surface, they began to rise, carrying with them heat away from the earth. So very slowly, the earth began to cool. One of the things that formed was water. In fact, all of the water that we have now was formed during this time. As soon as the water touched the earth, it turned back into gas or vapor. In the coolness next to space, the water cooled and formed a cloud. Soon, a cloud of vapor covered the earth and blocked the sunlight. The surface of the earth cooled even more and finally became solid. But the rock beneath this crust was still changing. Hot things have to move outward, so the melted rock burst through the skin of the earth, covering the surface of the earth with volcanoes. Slowly, slowly, the water continued to come down and cool the earth. It rained for millions of years, and this went on and on. The earth cooled more and more and more, until at last the water stayed on the earth and filled the low places. These became the oceans. All of this happened billions of years ago, but even to this day, everything that exists follows the same forces and principles of the universe. And so it was the earth was made. It is our gift to love and to care for. The story you just heard is the scientific story, a scientific theory of how the universe has changed over time. You may have heard other stories similar to this one in your churches, synagogues, or mosques. And it is important to remember that those stories are equally valid because they ask the same sorts of questions. Questions like where do we come from? Where are we going? Why are we here? And I hope you will continue to ask those questions and discuss them with your friends and family, because it is those sorts of questions that make life meaningful and worth living.